We'll call the Public Policy and Finance Committee to order, and we're going to hear Senate Bill, the substitute, Senate Bill 511. Before we could do that one, Senator Walker, if you'll come on up and take this seat right here, we'll do yours first. Yes, sir. Senate Bill 361. And your mic is on.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope y'all are doing well today. I know everybody's really busy. I'm sorry I'm a minute too late. I've been passing House bills out of the Senate Insurance Committee. I think we passed out 6, I believe.
Thank you.
So Senate Bill 361, Mr. Chairman, I brought a last minute substitution by Chairman Blackman's office this morning. I'm not sure if you all LC 432394S, and that was just a minor change to catch a kind of loophole that we didn't intend to have in there. We want this program to be, if we pass it, we want it to be spread out throughout the state and as many law enforcement agencies to take advantage of it as we can, and not have one law enforcement agency usurp all the money. And we felt like this was needed, this language in the substitute was needed to make that clear. I got elected in 2015. Ever since I've been up here, we've been struggling with ways to try to help law enforcement, local law enforcement, not state law enforcement, local law enforcement, with resources. And we've taken pretty good care, I would argue, of our state law enforcement officers, but we've never really had a mechanism to help the locals. And this is I think, a creative way to do that. It's modeled really after the rural hospital tax credit that's been very successful. And what it would allow is for nonprofit foundations to be established, or a lot of them already exist, in support of local law enforcement, and the citizens of Georgia would be able to donate to these foundations and get a dollar-for-dollar tax credit, and then the foundation would then be able to provide grants to the local law enforcement agency. And the grants would be in 4 areas: increase officer salaries, hire additional law enforcement personnel, expand police training programs, purchase or maintain department equipment, and establish or maintain an existing co-responder program that is dedicated to addressing mental health related emergencies. And we also passed a companion Senate bill to establish a statewide framework for this co-responder model. So that's what it does. I'll be happy to, go through it section by section if you'd like, or entertain questions.
So to be real clear, this modeled after the hospital tax credit so we'll be able to donate to essentially for public safety, and then take the tax credit, the people who donate on the income tax.
That's
credit.
right. Yes, sir.
Dr. Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, thank you for being here with us.
Yes,
and,
sir.
And thank you for this measure. I certainly believe that there's nothing we can do that's more noble than try and support all of our law enforcement officials. And so when I'm looking at the bill, I'm trying to dive in a little bit to the what is a qualified law enforcement foundation. I know there's different organizations across the state today. It's Fraternal Order of Police. There could be things are certain local groups have. But what I worry a little bit about is with the rural hospital tax credit, what your hospital is, and you know what your community hospital is, and so when you make that investment, that it's going to your rural hospital there. And then I know there's a certification process in this bill for the commissioner of DOR to certify, but do we have anything in place for limiting, one foundation per municipality, or having the city or the county designate what that foundation is going to be for their community, just so there's not confusion, just so there's not bad actors who we have to for lack of a bad pun, police?
Well, great. That's a great question. So line 19 through 23 defines what a law enforcement foundation is or would be under this statute. And our intent, as opposed to the rural hospital tax credit or the student scholarship or organization tax credit, what we were trying to achieve with this is to allow is any communities that want to do this to establish a 501c3 in support of their local law enforcement to do it. So we do envision multiple or many of these being set up, and I'm told that it's pretty easy to set up a 501c3. The Atlanta Police Foundation is the largest one in Georgia, and they've offered to help other law enforcement or other communities set these up. But the intent is to avoid having, and I don't mean this to disparage the HEART program or the GOLD program, but 100% of this money potentially would go to law enforcement. There's no fee where you've got a intermediary, so to speak. You do have an intermediary in this foundation, but it does not provide for this foundation to make any money off of this. So like with the HEART program, I think maybe it's a 3% administrative fee or something like that. And we cap this at $100 million annually and $5 million per law enforcement agency. So you're talking about a lot of money if you're talking about 3%. So that's why we structured it to where you'd have lots of different foundations involved. The other concept is to try to get the people in your community engaged with law enforcement and build that partnership and strengthen the ties there. So it is, and you could look at it quickly and think, well, this is going to be a lot of duplication, lots of foundations, but that's what we think is the strength of it.
And that was kind of a little bit to my concern, or just, desire to make sure we are being as effective and efficient as possible, because you referenced the Atlanta Police Foundation, and you said they're the largest one in the state and probably the most established. So what if I created one and I just called it the City of Atlanta Police Foundation? I just barely tweaked the name, and I get certified because it's easy to start a 501c3. I could put up a mission statement. And then what if I start going out soliciting donations, and under the guise of someone thinking they're contributing to a well-established organization, that they start contributing to the one I've started that's not necessarily, the best one. And I know the market will dictate some of that, but when you are limiting the amount of credits we're going to give, I kind of feel like we should have some way for either the city or the municipality or the sheriff's office, whose officers are going to benefit, to be able to only, allow, one per, municipality or county or sheriff's office, so that we are maximizing the effectiveness of it. Because if you're not, if you got, 600 of these and they're all getting just a little sliver, they're not going to be able to maximize the benefit as much. And that's the only consideration I would have, along with, and just one more follow-up, Mr. Chairman, is I know we've prohibited our state law enforcement officials from being able to participate in this. And I guess my thought was, why wouldn't we allow them the same opportunity to benefit from this as, local law enforcement? I think it's great for local law enforcement. I think, why don't we let the state patrol or the GBI or the DNR, officers?
Well, so the last part of your question, I would say, is because we're already funding those state law enforcement with taxpayer dollars. So I don't see the benefit really of giving tax credits to give them additional funding when that's our purview and our responsibility as appropriators. We're already doing that, whereas we're not doing that with the local law enforcement officials. And then the other part is a great point, and you may want to amend it to make it, that each law enforcement agency can only have one benefactor, maybe, but Line 44 through 46 does define, again, gives more definition to the Qualified Law Enforcement Foundation and requires that they be certified by the Revenue Commissioner. So there is a process that it'll have to go through to be approved. And I would suggest to you that I don't think these foundations are going to be successful without the local community support and the participation or sort of endorsement of your local sheriff or your local police department.
And that's just what I wanted to make sure of, is that we didn't have competing, foundations, especially sheriff's races. I know, I've been involved and had to help, mediate disputes between, current sheriffs and former sheriffs about who had the access and password to the Facebook page. And, I just want to make sure that we have some mechanism in place for that, because I do appreciate the goal of what this has done. And I worked, I guess 8 years ago, pretty heavily with our lieutenant governor when we did the rural hospital tax credit. And I think we've benefited as a state from it. So I appreciate the intent of this and supporting our local law enforcement officials. But those are just my minor concerns.
If you go through, when you start on line 76, it gives the commissioners some guidelines on the approval process, and it requires that the foundation identify their affiliated law enforcement units. And I would hope the commissioner would not look favorably to having multiple ones, in that situation that you bring up, but I'm happy to work with you if you think it needs to be tightened up.
I appreciate
think
that.
that's valid.
Thank you, Senator.
Chairman Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question to you, Senator Walker, thanks for this tremendous thought and effort y'all put into this, but is it not true that the number one purpose for a local government is to protect to keep its citizens safe? Isn't that true?
I think it is the incumbent on all levels of government.
Well, I think the reason for a city or a county government is first and foremost should be you have certain conditions to even qualify to be a city. And I think I'm getting to your point really, is that it's a crying shame. Is it not true? It's a crying shame that we even come to this point that we have to figure out innovative ways to get the proper resources to law enforcement throughout cities and counties in the state of Georgia. Is that not true?
I would agree with that. I am especially excited about this opportunity though, because a lot of the counties and communities I represent don't have much of a property tax base and don't have a lot of resources. And I do think this is a way for citizens that care to get involved and help.
And furthermore, if you don't mind, I've got to give a shout out to Chairman Houston Gaines, because didn't we have a lot of pushback as the General Assembly as we attempted to make sure that local governments didn't cut their police budgets by, I believe it was 5%. Is that correct, Chairman Gaines? So I applaud the Senate's efforts towards trying to get these resources to our local police and county sheriff's departments. But you follow me now, structurally, we've gone from the gold scholarship program, redirection taxes, and principally you could argue that a lot of that was due to the fact that there were Catholic schools and other church related schools that the state government can't give money to such as that. So that workaround was that you could redirect taxes to these private entities. A lot of people say it's a modern form of vouchers, but wholeheartedly supported that effort. And then we came along with it was a Senate idea for the Heart Fund or whatever we call it to help address the financial needs of our at-risk community hospitals. And now we got this good idea, but really, is it not true? It's just another way of appropriating dollars. And my concern is that goes against the state constitution yet again, that the House of Representatives is supposed to be the ones appropriating money through the appropriations process. it's structurally is what I have a problem with these well-intentioned ideas to redirect tax dollars back into local communities. Because the next step is our firefighters, our first responders, our paramedics, all sorts of other interest groups that we've got to protect, got to adequately fund. I believe it's best done at the local level. But we're just going to get into an ever escalating situation that we're going to be using these workarounds, the appropriation process. That's my concern is structural. It's nothing against the great intentions of the bill. Was this unanimously approved in the Senate, or?
It was, and this is a idea from the Lieutenant Governor and something he's real passionate about. Not that that carries a lot of weight in the House, but
finally, I'm gonna start with my final last question was a repeat of my first one. Isn't it true this is a sad state of affairs where the cities and counties aren't adequately supporting and resourcing the men and women that protect us?
I would agree with that. I would add to it, however, if you don't mind, that I think that we talk about two Georgias. And it really is that way. And a lot of the area that I see that just they're losing population and losing property tax base. And I applaud Governor Kemp for his strong effort on economic development outside of the metro area. And that's been successful, but I see this as a way to help. It's not that the locals don't want to do this. It's a lot of times a matter of resources.
Mr. Chairman, is this hearing only or?
Yes.
Okay. I'd love to get with you some ideas.
Okay, we're going to have Chairman Blackman, then Chairman Newton, then Chairman Smith, then Chairman Houston, then Chairman Martin.
My Lord.
I know Chairman Newton has a meeting
Okay,
to
you
attend
wanna go
to. I'd
first?
be happy to defer to him if he.
Thank you. Thank you for the goals of the bill. I did have two kind of more technical questions. One, I guess in line 88 through 90, it discusses that the commissioner, I assume that's the Commissioner of Department of Revenue,
Yes, sir.
and that's the individual who will prescribe the form. It looks like on line 88 on what a qualified law enforcement foundation would be. I assume that could change if now that's a governor appointee, right? So that form could change from year to year, depending on whoever the governor and whoever the commissioner was. Is that reasonably?
I would think you're right. Yes, sir.
That was one question. The other question had more to do, and maybe I missed it
But
somewhere in
I
the
do
bill.
think the commissioner currently approves 501c3s as part of his duty anyway, but I'm not positive of that, but I think that is a normal role of the Department of Revenue is to certify or approve 501c3s.
The other part of the question had to do a little bit with, and maybe it's in the bill somewhere, is there any guarantee that a newly formed law enforcement foundation would be able to keep any of the money for overhead? If they were just established for this, for a particular organization, maybe it's like Representative Kelly's City of Atlanta Law Enforcement Foundation. Says the commission, fills out the form, assuming that they follow whatever the commissioner's form was, they shall be approved. And so now he solicits money. I shouldn't use a perfect example, but suppose, is there anything that says 100% of each $10,000 donation will go through to or could it be a 10 or 15 or 50% overhead? And they collect $2 million and only $1 million of it gets through. It's just
I think there is, but I would have to find it in the bill. So if you want to bear with me.
it doesn't look like it has anything what we call a medical loss ratio or medical spend ratio in a recent mental health bill, anything requiring 85% of the donations to pass through, or even 97%, I think was mentioned when it came to school scholarship organizations. And because of that, I guess it doesn't seem to be any too many restrictions on how many law enforcement
So
foundations there
on
could
line
be.
167, it says each qualified law enforcement foundation shall only use funds received by it from qualified contributions to make qualified expenditures.
Do you take that as they can take no overhead out of the
That's how
funds?
I interpret that. Yes, sir.
Oh, but it's just a question I wanted to address. I'm not sure. Maybe that's understood that you can have a not-for-profit organization that takes zero out for overhead. I don't, anyway, I just wanted to raise the question as we're working on the bill. But anyway, well, thank you. I certainly look forward to supporting the law enforcement goals of this. And I just wanted to raise a couple of questions that had come to mind. I appreciate it.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Chairman Blackman, then Smith, then Houston, then Martin.
Thank you. And thank you to my senator for being here, Chairman. I maybe follow up a little bit on a couple of the questions asked. And I think probably speak for just about everybody sitting around this table. I shouldn't say just about, I think everybody in this room fully support our law enforcement from top to bottom, local, state, and on up the line. And appreciate what the goal is of the legislation. Is there, I just, started thinking about our county. I mean, I guess we would potentially, have the county and then the 3 cities would each have their own
Potentially, yes, sir.
foundation. Just thinking of what Representative Kelly alluded to. And I guess some of the other things, and I know Chairman Gaines spoke to this with some legislation or addressed this last year with regards to the fluctuation and local funding. But I'm just thinking with inflation and potentially with the growth of certain cities, is it possible that these funds in an unintended consequence kind of way could be depended on, for that funding, and that funding could go away year to year?
I think that would be a challenge for your local elected officials to have to consider. And I used to sit on the school board that got the goal funding, and we had to really be careful that we didn't award a gold scholarship to, say, an 8th grader, and then in 10th grade told them we couldn't do it anymore. That kind of thing. So that is definitely something that would have to be managed.
Thank you.
It's a good point. Thank you, my representative.
Forgive me, Representative Fry, your light was blinking and it was right in front of me. So you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought I was getting overlooked. I appreciate this bill, Senator. I think it's a great idea that there's a lot of, I call this taxpayer directed taxes, right? And there's a lot of things that I can appreciate that we wouldn't want to pay our taxes to. And this gives you an opportunity to pay your tax bill to something that you believe in. And so all of these, I think, are incredible. I got a question about line 20 that maybe can address some of the questions that we've had earlier. And I'm trying to see if it's written this way. It says a domestic nonprofit corporation with the sole function of supporting one local law enforcement unit. Is there anything in this that would preclude that local law enforcement unit from creating their own nonprofit and operating it because they already have back end, and then they wouldn't have to spend any of the money on admin because they already have that covered, and then they could solicit donations for their specific unit that they're in? And I feel like that's the language we're looking at, where one nonprofit is created per law enforcement unit, because the sole function of the nonprofit is supporting one local law enforcement unit. Right? So you couldn't have one that would aggregate and say, hey, I'll get you some money, I'll get you some money too, and I'll get you some money. You'd have to have one per one local law enforcement unit. Am I?
So I think the intention is, that's our intention
Right,
with the bill.
right.
And I think the fear is you don't want like a statewide, maybe law enforcement foundation
That's exactly,
cobbling up all the money and then having all that much influence to pick winners and losers. We wanted it to be a grassroots, locally driven, really close to the local law enforcement agency.
follow up.
Yes.
So really the intent of the legislation is for a law enforcement agency to be able to create a nonprofit that could accept taxpayer donations for their own use on qualified expenditures. And then that, in that way, they would have 100% of the proceeds, because to manage the donations would be just, they have any law enforcement agency has a finance department, right? Or somebody that does the books. And so it seems like that is would that be the intent?
Yes, sir. I think I'm understanding what you're saying. That is the intent.
Thank you,
Thank
Vice
you, Mr.
Chairman
Chair.
Smith. Yes, sir. Did you?
Isn't it true there are a lot of volunteer fire departments all across the state? And was any consideration given to those communities, small communities? I live in one of them. Our fire department's all volunteer. Was it any consideration given as about the funding for them?
No, sir, we didn't really talk about that. We're seeing so much crime really throughout the country, and certainly in Georgia, and violent crime and mental health. It's been such a crisis. We've focused on that, not the firefighters.
Chairman Houston.
One thing that sort of concerns me that Representative Newton spoke on, I know with the so many nonprofits now, you have to go to a website to see how much they spend on administration. And when you say expenses, they consider it administration. I don't know if you ever, before you give some money back to the Ukraine, you've probably gone on the website to see exactly how much really went to the cause and how much went to the Ukraine. And I support nonprofits, but not all nonprofits are created equally.
I would
And
agree.
some of them are really big scams. And I know just in my, if we did them, I represent 3 counties, and I can't tell you how many municipalities I do. And I can't imagine all those nonprofits, you know, in every town I have, and every county. I mean, I'd have 18 probably nonprofits to deal with. But I don't know this, how you would figure it up. We haven't really had any problems with the Heart Scholarship. You know, like you said, didn't you say they made 3%?
Well, I think that's the figure, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Because it
Y'all
cost
probably
you-
know better than
But
me.
and the Heart Scholarship, I don't think we've gotten up to 100 million yet, but we sure would like to.
I thought we did.
What did we do?
I thought we actually capped out, and there's a bill, I
Was
think,
the bill to
to,
increase it.
I think
Is it
so.
Increase it to 60, 70, 60 to
75.
75 million. And we've been doing this a long time. We just got it, but we'll be glad to take 100 million too.
Chairman Martin.
Chair Lady, the line 125 through, I think, 142 list out the reporting requirements for these foundations to give transparency to this. I'm not sure how much transparency we have with the other tax credit programs, but this seemed pretty thorough to me.
Ready, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Senator Walker, couple of questions we got a new bill this morning. Was there a lot of changes from the last one?
So the only change was we felt like the way we had written it, there was a potential loophole that would have allowed a local law enforcement unit to accept more than the capped amount, the $5 million,
Right.
by having multiple of these foundations give to them. Like the Atlanta Police Foundation, maybe they could raise and give 5 million to the Atlanta Police Department. And then another foundation could give to the Atlanta Police Department. We wanted to make it clear that the law enforcement unit can only get the maximum 5 million.
Fair enough. I just wanted to make sure I was talking, looking at the bill before. So you would agree that what this is basically an individual taxpayer, instead of sending whatever their tax liability, $4,000 or $5,000. I mean, it caps at 5,000. Then send it to state. They would pick a foundation and give to. That's what the bill does.
Yes, sir. Redirecting their state tax liability. Yes,
Right.
sir.
And so it would be the same if we just budgeted 100 million a year and put that out for law enforcement agents to have law enforcement agencies to have grants. And then we'd have absolute transparency because we'd do it through our appropriations process like we do other things. Could we not do that?
The financial implication, I guess, the end result financially, I think, would be the same, but I think we've hesitated in the past once the state government starts directly funding local law enforcement, I think the tendency would be then for state government to.
But that's
want
exactly
to
what we're
run.
doing. That's exactly what we're doing here. If instead of sending money to the state, you send it to a local law enforcement, I mean, we may not touch the money in the meantime, but that's exactly what we're choosing to do. So and here's the reason I'm saying that, because you mentioned like small agencies need this support, but there's nothing in the bill that keeps the city of Atlanta, the, more metro oriented police departments, Fulton County marshals. For instance, you can go to the Fulton County Sheriff's Department, for Fulton County marshals, Fulton County Police, Atlanta Public. There's 20 million of it right there. There's 20% of your 100 million goes straight right here. And here's how that happens. The mayor of the city of Atlanta tells all the people that work for the city of Atlanta, y'all direct your tax liability to the APS Foundation. And we're going to use that to give raises. And then I'll have more raises to give you as city employees. And then our small cities and counties still get left out. So I'm with you. If there are places there are places we need to help, I'm with you. I really truly am. But it's just what can happen. It could even be the police officers could say, hey, give your tax liability to this foundation and we can do more things with it. I just wish we'd get in a place, if we need this, we need to own it as a state and make the application. And respectfully, the other thing that worries me is the code section we looked at in the 167, it says each qualified law enforcement shall only use funds received by it from qualified contributions to make qualified expenditures. So a foundation can only take what it gets to make expenditures. It doesn't say it has to take all it gets to make expenditures. There's nothing in the bill that would keep one of these nonprofits from paying their CEO $150,000, $200,000 a year. I don't see anything in the bill that does that.
But that would not be a qualified expenditure, so they'd have to raise that money elsewhere. If they wanted to pay their director $200,000, they can't use it out of this pot of money.
It says it only uses, it says shall only use funds it received to make qualified expenditures. So you don't think that running the administration would be a qualified expenditure?
No, sir, because we
Okay.
list them out what they are.
Fair enough. All right. So that's maybe in there. So that's helpful. So you don't think there would be a bleed from these? You're comfortable in that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So then I just come back to, how are we to be assured that these monies, these tax expenditures,
Now, they could hold the money. It doesn't, to further on your kind of conversation,
sure,
they can hold the money and say, we want to decide we want to accumulate $100,000 before we offer any grants, or we want to accumulate 500,000 before we do any grants. But they cannot spend the money except for qualified expenditures.
Okay. All right, that's fair enough. So you believe that to be the 100% then, to go back to, I believe, Representative Fry's question or Chairman Smith. So you believe 100% of this would flow through?
Yes. And the other question, Chairman, if you don't mind, do we want state government directing local law enforcement? And if we start appropriating money directly to local law enforcement, then the state eventually is going to start running local law enforcement, in
Well,
my opinion.
Well, I understand.
And this
I
is a way
understand
to
that's
get the local community. The monies generally, I think, would come from people that have a vested interest in that community and are closer to the community. And
Well-
it's beyond dollars and cents. It's also trying to bring, community, strengthen community policing and the relationship between, say, the Perry Rotary Club and the Perry Police Department.
Okay, I'll be a bit cynical and say, do you think the person that maybe gave $5,000 to the foundation would be treated any different in a law enforcement situation than somebody that didn't?
They shouldn't be, because the foundation itself is the one making determinations on awarding grants, not the donor.
But they're only giving it to the foundation, the Perry or the Alpharetta, foundation. I mean, they're not giving it directly to the chief or the lieutenant or the
Correct.
watch commander, but if you made known that foundation gave you a little sticker to go on your car that you were a donor.
The donors,
I guess
the donors are not supposed to be revealed. Is that wrong?
They can be private, but I mean, I think we're being cynical to think people aren't going to let it be known. But I want to get back. I want to get back to the point of state telling local law enforcement what to do. I think Chairman Houston may be more up to date on this, but I mean, there's a lot of places that money is block granted out to various things in cities. And I mean, that's typically, I think, some of the federal dollars is put out in a block grant. I just would suggest that if we wanted to do this, that we make this, expenditure in a block grant to City of X Police Department to do as they need to do, to help them over a hard patch. And I'll stop, Mr. Chairman, because I actually have a parallel meeting going on now too. But what concerns me is the senator made it a great point. There are some law enforcement agencies in the states that are really in need of this, but they're going to be competing with larger agencies that can take great chunks of this off the table before they even, I mean, probably in some of these small centers, there's not one of these foundations set up today. Whereas in the metro area, these foundations are going to be set up, and 30 days after this is done, I would bet you that half the money is going to be subscribed by large donors in those areas. And that worries me about the gentleman, your point being getting the money to where it's needed. I would suggest refining that somehow. I don't have an answer for you. And with that, again, support law enforcement. I just worry that the details could be problematic in getting the money where the gentleman wants it.
Representative Fry, you have a follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I agree with you 100%, Chairman Martin. I think we definitely need to be careful and make sure that the places that need the money the most are going to be getting. I think that's the intent of the legislation. Just a suggestion on the language to stop these rogue actors would be that potentially you could say each law enforcement unit can create a nonprofit that is able to receive those funds, right? So like one unit in your community could do their own nonprofit, and boom, you're done. And then that way you're not going to have multiple foundations donating to one group, and it's just one for one. Might solve up.
Mr. Chairman, we got this room for an hour.
I think we've got it until 3. But I know we need to move on, and the senators both are being very gracious with their time. I was just going to ask, one final question of the author, if he thought that potentially as we may, look at tweaks or whatever, that, you're comfortable with, would it be appropriate to look at, and I'm not sure which direction to take this in, but, seeing as how we've passed, marketplace facilitator and some other things that have increased, some of the money going to local governments, is there a way to, I don't know, incorporate whether or not those have been used in a way to help law enforcement as we look at, some of the way they, are able to grab some of this income tax refund, this income tax, credit money, or would it work conversely? I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of thinking out loud as we in real time here, but maybe something we can also talk about after.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Is there anybody in the audience that wanted a very small comment on the issue so that we may move on? Here, the floor can be yours. In that case, thank you, Senator.
Thank you,
for
Chairman
coming to bring it
Stevens.
forward.
Appreciate y'all's time and good questions. Thank you very much.
Chairman Anderson.
I thought y'all was gonna name it the Randy Robertson Foundation.
Senate Bill 511.
Good afternoon. Thank y'all for allowing us to be here today. I'll bring you, is this just a hearing? Is this,
Yes, sir.
mine is going to just be a hearing also? Is it?
Yeah, yes, sir, to come
I
back.
mean, I
with it.
tried to get all y'all's local bills out,
And I appreciate that very much. You did very well before I even come to ask. You did a
Yeah.
wonderful job.
and I love to get your bill out at 3:00. And-
Yes, sir.
and-
That's
and,
why I was asking what
get
time.
it Mr. Chairman. Anyway, Senate Bill 511 is LC 4323H6S. My clerk of court back home in Columbia County asked for this bill, and it's a very simple bill to me, but when you have your when you want to appeal your tax properties, you have a process of going through 180 days that the tax assessor and the equalization board has to evaluate the appeal. Well, it's been brought to my attention that they would like to still keep it 180 days, but divide the 180 days to where tax assessor has 90 days and the equalization board has 90 days. And that's really the meat of the bill.
Let's see, I forgot who's first. Chairman Blackman?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, sir. Trey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, thank you for the legislation. I guess my question would just be, why do they want it divided up that way?
Because in some cases, the tax assessors has took longer than 90 days. They took more like 160, 170 days, and then they turn it over to the equalization board, and then the equalization board does not have the proper time to be able to do that part.
Got it. Thank you. I was just trying to understand that. Thank you.
Makes sense. Chairman Blackman?
I want to say, Mr. Holloman and I have talked about this, but I wanted to ask you, Senator, and thanks for bringing a non-revenue bill to Ways and I'm just kidding. The 29 through 32, the property valuation asserted by the taxpayer, that doesn't default.
Which lines now?
29 through 32. It doesn't change the default,
No. It just, all it does is 90 days and 90 days.
I'm just looking at what's stricken there, and it says it says if the tax assessors fail to respond to the taxpayer, the appeal shall be forwarded to the County Board of Equalization. And I was trying to look at what was scratched and just make sure that it didn't default in, against the taxpayer as opposed to default in their favor. That's all.
I think we might have somebody to, would you
Yeah,
come
I
up
think
to
he can
mic?
answer
Mr. Chairman,
that.
I have,
Absolutely.
If you'll pull that mic number 2 there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Mike Holloman. I do represent Superior Court clerks on this issue. Chairman Blackman, if you look at lines 96 to 101, we just moved that limit. In fact, the first time I ever talked to you about this bill, I hadn't added it back in. You pointed out to me very quickly that the legislature wouldn't accept eliminating that. So we added that deadline, the 180-day total deadline on lines 96 to 101.
No, thank you for the clarification. I just know we got a late sub and I was jumping from which, one to the other and wanted to
Yeah,
make sure.
well,
we got
that's
that
actually been
covered.
part of the previous versions, except for that raw draft that I showed you, which had not been to leg council, by the way.
Very good.
Had only been to my leg council, and I'm a very
All right.
poor leg council.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Any other members' questions? Representative Kelly.
And Mike, thank you. And I appreciate you looking to add that language back in. And I think I've kind of came to the same conclusion as my seatmate over here. It is a little different in verbiage. And so I'm trying to just bounce back and forth. And it says, if the county board of tax assessors fails to respond, the original language, to the tax within 180-day period, the property valuation, then you go to the default for the taxpayer. When we skip down, it changes that language. It modifies that language from being fails to respond to if there is no hearing scheduled by the appeal administrator within 180 days. And a time extension has not been granted pursuant to paragraph 3 of this subsection, then we get the default.
Right.
And then there's a qualifier that didn't exist previously. Starting on line 100, it says if the taxpayer receives an indicated value due to the provisions of the subparagraph, such value shall not be used as comparison to other tax appeals. And I understand the policy discussion that could be had there,
I agree.
but it is a shift in policy, correct?
The lines that you just pointed out, 101 to 102, were added at the request of the tax assessors organization. And we understand why.
Yeah.
And that certainly is a policy decision, and that's up to y'all to decide on that. To your other point, however, no hearing schedule language, that's a similar idea exists in current statute. They don't have to hold the hearing within 180 days. They just have to schedule it. It has to be scheduled within 180 days. And I'm trying to find where that exists. Shall set a date for a hearing to shall hold a hearing. Line 72 is another place. Well, yeah. See, that's where it exists currently. Shall set a date, shall schedule. I mean, I think they mean the same thing.
Thank you. And that's where I want to just, try and figure out the timeline that does work for. Because, we do want this to, I understand the problem Senator Anderson raised and how you have an assessor that sat on their hands till the 11th hour. And I can see how that's a problem for the Board of Equalization, but I don't want us to fix their problem and create a problem for the taxpayer, which I'm a little concerned about the way we've modified that language down there at the end.
Where,
I'm again talking, kind of just down in general. I want to look at how 96 through 102 plays into the current system and whether that is, and specifically lines 100 through 102. I understand why the assessors would want it, but I also understand as a taxpayer why I may not want it. And I don't know who they're outside of us being the taxpayer organization advocates. I don't know who else represents them down here.
Mr. Chairman, can I respond? Please, thank you. Again, I don't believe that we've changed any of the timelines for the taxpayer. The 180 days we have, as Senator Anderson pointed out, simply said, tax assessors, you need to, after 90 days, you need to move it along because we've got to get these things scheduled. Your second point to lines 101 and 102, I've got no counter to that. That is in fact a policy decision that I'm comfortable with this committee making. It does not add to or detract from my purpose, which is to simply equitably allocate the available time
And I
between-
appreciate that.
That's our objective. We added things as people do when you put a bill out there, people start knocking on your door.
It starts coming that Christmas tree. I understand.
Right.
But
understand.
I can, if the taxpayer, see, I think as it was presented to me, was that some appellates place a really low ball number, hoping that they can drag the process out and get a default value. And, okay, that's gaming. That's the way it works. But we don't want some low ball figure to be used as a comparable across the board. It's a one-off value. And yes, the taxpayer gets the benefit of that sometimes really extremely low ball amount. So we'll give them that, but we don't, the tax assessors don't want it to impact a broad range of other values as they do their work. That's the reason I believe that they've asked to put this in there.
And maybe that's the stick that we need to make them do their job in a timely manner.
I'll leave that.
if you don't want to, if you don't want to have the default, then just do your job within 180 days. And there's, I'm not trying to beat up on anybody, but that's the way to make sure you don't have the default is just
Do your job.
do your job and get it expedited for the taxpayer. So, I mean, I'm a property tax paying citizen like everybody, and there's not a tax I hate paying more than property taxes. And I think most of our
You
constituents
join the club.
agree. So that's why I just want to be very careful about that. So thank you, Mike. I understand y'all's purpose of the bill, and I want to help y'all in the clerks,
Thank you.
with it,
I appreciate it.
with the underlying goal.
Maybe if the committee passes, you carry the bill.
I will talk about it.
Actually, the underlying bill is laudable. Any other committee members? Anybody else want to speak to the bill?
Chairman.
Yes, sir, Mike.
At the risk of, I was approached today with another ask from the assessors, and that would be
I got a little amendment.
that amendment. And what it would do is at the end of line 23, add, the Board of Equalization shall have the authority to approve any agreements between the Board of Tax Assessors and the taxpayer. Now, it seemed evident to me when I was first given that language that ought to be obvious. If the appellate and the assessor, who are the parties to the dispute, agree prior to a BOE hearing, why wouldn't the BOE accept that? And I understand that in some counties, remember BOE panels are pretty independent. The clerk is the scheduler. We don't run BOEs. I want to make that clear. We don't train them. We don't run the hearings. They're in there, and the grand jury appoints these BOE members. And I'll just say some of them can kind of get a little, full of themselves, and they start saying, well, we learned at DOR training that we had to hold a hearing. It doesn't happen universally by any means, and I don't know how often you're going to see that happen, but I have heard from them that in some BOE panels will not accept a negotiated amount between, and I can't imagine. So
Been there, done that.
as we move forward, I would appreciate a consideration of that amendment. Again, that's not mine, but I did agree to present it to the committee.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
This makes it appear that they have the option, but they're not required to approve that. We've just suggesting that wording, Board of Equalization shall have the authority, but they're not required to. It seems that your issue is that you would require them to do that rather than to try to overrule the Board of Assessors.
No, we're not requiring them to, but I think this isn't my language, first of all.
No.
This is secondhand. The way I understand it is they believe they've been trained that it is not allowable to do that. And this would make it clear that it is allowable.
I think, we probably have talked about it a good bit and we'll take that under advisement. There's been some substitutes and maybe the committee will substitute it further. Appreciate the author of the bill being here.
Thank you.
Thank
And thank you for the author for his patience during this time. And thank you for getting my bill out, by the way. Anybody else want to speak to the bill before we adjourn? If not, we are adjourned.
Thank you.